In order to draw figures for interior design, I'd like you to practice by taking a sheet of paper and dividing it into 4 parts. In the first part, I want you to plan to draw a figure large and medium and small. I'm going to do that from the front and from the side so that you can see how that's set up. In each case. When I set my parameters, I have the top of my figure here and the bottom of my figure here. I want to make sure that my proportion is correct. So I go to the center and I make a little mark. At the center of the figure is where the hips sit. The great trochanter is right at the middle. So the pelvis is going to sit up above that. The 3 major ellipses that we draw in are the head, the rib cage, and the pelvis. The rib cage is a little bit bigger. The head and the pelvis are a little bit smaller. I put a little bit of space in between each one so that I can get a neck and a waistline in there. So I basically draw 3 ovals above that center line for head, rib cage, and pelvis. Then I draw 2 little circles on either side of the rib cage for the shoulders. Halfway through the rib cage is where the chest line or the breasts are going to sit. The bottom of the rib cage is where the belly button is going to be. So this is where your hip bones are. This is your shoulders. This is your head. Halfway through the head, we have the eyes. The ears sit on either side of that. If you want to make a nose, you can put something like that out. You don't want to get too much detail going on in an architectural drawing because you don't want the figures to distract from the interiors. Halfway between the hips and the floor are the knees. So the feet are going to be here on the floor. I draw from the hip to the knee and to the floor in one triangular sort of motion. Architectural drawings usually don't do much with the legs. The hands hang, if you notice, your pockets sit just below your hip line. So your hands are going to hang here. I usually don't do more than that for the hands. I do a little claw-like kind of thing. A little something that'll show where the thumb is, perhaps. Halfway between the shoulder and the wrist is the elbow. So if you want to put a little bend in the elbow, you do something like that. You can also go straight down, understanding that your elbow is going to be in here somewhere. That gives us a fairly good stick figure to draw from. Then we want to just abstract things for clothing. So if this is a man or a woman, I would probably come down here and make this a little bit triangular down to the waist. If it's a man, I usually put a belt on here, some lines here for the pants. Maybe a little bit broader shoulders. Something like that. If this were a woman, and here when I go halfway, I'm going to divide this in half. I'm going to put the hips here and the head here and the rib cage here. My heads often come out way too big, so I want to just take that and make it a little bit smaller and make that rib cage a little bit bigger. Halfway between the hip and the floor is the knee. So if that's a woman, I'm going to put a little skirt or something on it right there and do something like this. Shoulder's going to come out this way. Elbow down to a hand. Eyes halfway across and her nose is here. I might put hair on like this. If I have this kind of thing going on for a head, I put a line through the middle and I put a line through the middle that way. So I've got my nose coming. I usually put my nose off to the right or the left. I'll put eyes in here. And an ear from here to here. Ears go from the brows to the bottom of the nose, which is halfway between the eye and the chin. If I'm going to make that into a woman, I will do something like this sometimes. If we're next doing this, I'll just bring a hairline down like that, or like this, so that I get something that looks a little bit feminine in terms of hair. I try not to do too much detail. I'm often trying to get myself to stop fiddling with these, because once again, this is not the focal point of my drawing, and especially when I get down into something like a tiny little figure like this, somebody off in the distance, I'm hardly going to see anyway. So you've all seen examples of figures that are done something like that. This sort of idea pays off if you've got a room drawn, and let's say your 5-foot line is here, and this is an 8-foot room. If a person stands at the back of the room, their eye level is going to be here on this line. So I draw their head like that, and then I draw the center line down here to the floor, and I place their feet here on the floor. Now I've got the height and of the figure. So I'm going to come halfway between here, and I'm going to put a line there for their waist. Now obviously I've made their head too big, so I'm going to make their head a little smaller. I'm going to put their rib cage here, and their pelvis right there. This person's only going to be this tall, so I don't need any detail hardly at all back there. If a person's standing out here in the room, their head is still going to be at eye level. If I want to make that person a little taller, you know, someone like me is 6 feet tall, so it may be that you want to come here to a 6-foot line or something and figure out where that height would be, but usually their head's going to be like right somewhere on this line. Drop that down to the floor. Now I've got the height. I can come halfway for the waist. My head's big again, so I'm going to make it a little smaller there. Okay, so those are very basic people. From the side, I still divide my line in half. I put my pelvis here and my head here. My rib cage actually tilts back a little bit because the rib cage tilts just about 20-30 degrees back. Then what I do is I put a convex curve at the back of the head, a concave curve to connect the neck to the rib cage. Convex, concave, convex. Then I go to the opposite side and I connect right here at the greater trochanter. I know the thigh comes down like this, and the calf comes on the opposite side of the line, and then I put the feet down here on the floor. So that's sort of a basic croquis, they call it in France, a setup for a figure if I'm drawing it from the front. So the chest is going to be here. If there's a breast, it's going to come out a little further. Cut in here. Her skirt's going to come up here and fall right about here, halfway. And come down to an elbow. I'm going to have her holding a tray. Smaller figure, same kind of thing. I'm going to come in here halfway. Again, my head's way too big for that, right? Just change it as you go along. That's what sketching is. If someone's at an angle, sometimes I'll set their shoulders off towards a left vanishing point or a right vanishing point. So I'll put one hip and one shoulder a little bit higher than the other. You can even do a contrapposto if you want to put one shoulder lower and the other shoulder. This hip's going to come up and that one's going to drop in a contrapposto, right? That's really very simple, but that's just going to get the idea that you have people in your space. It's going to make your spaces more understandable in terms of proportion, and it's going to make your spaces more interesting because people want to be in places that are occupied by other people.